Welcome to my listening sessions. The following is a reading from the second Ari Adams mystery, White Offerings. When Ari pulled up to Southwest Realty, Jane Frank was already sitting on the porch, her cell phone glued to her ear. Ari could see her long pink nails gesturing with the conversation, which clearly wasn't pleasant. Her perfectly painted face, coiffed brown hair, and designer suit created the consummate image of a professional businesswoman. When she was dressed like a conservative Republican, no stranger would ever suspect that her closet harbored her true self, a wild dyke with enough sex toys to start her own adult store. There were, though, very few lesbians in Phoenix who were strangers to her bedroom. Women adored Jane and gravitated to her physical beauty and extraordinary charm. Her fiery personality burned high most of the time, feeding primarily on anger or passion. Fear and vulnerability were foreign concepts, and if she ever felt anxious or nervous, she hid those emotions from Ari, until recently, until the appearance of the orchids. Jane looked up and waved. Her eyes narrowed in protest to the phone conversation, and several times she tried to interrupt, only to close her mouth in futility. Ari smiled, amused. She was sure Jane was talking to Aspen Harper, her least favorite client and Phoenix's new premier chef. Aspen was intent on debating and arguing every point of the transaction with her. Ari imagined the commission must be hefty if Jane agreed to endure Aspen's constant scrutiny and second-guessing, even late at night when she would call, anxious about her first home purchase. They had spent 2 months searching for the perfect house, one that didn't seem to exist. Ari unlocked the converted bungalow, and Jane followed her through the quiet hallways to her office, prattling away with standard responses and soothing words of encouragement. Ari glanced into the spacious main office as they passed its door, surprised that her boss, Lorraine Gonzalez, had not arrived. Jane dropped onto the divan, flipped off her heels, and hung her stocking feet over the arm of the couch. "I'm sure I'll catch up with you this afternoon," she said. "Bye." She disconnected and stared at Ari. "Why are we in this business?" "To make a ton of money, honey," a voice answered. "At least when the market cooperates." They looked up to see Lorraine Gonzalez in the doorway. A perky woman in her 40s, her beautiful smile masked the hard life she'd known before opening Southwest Realty. She was full of curves, as Jane described her, and the tailored suit she wore accented her buxom bosom. She tapped her fingers on the door jamb and glanced between them. "What are you two doing here?" "I got another orchid," Jane said. Lorraine shook her head. "That's really creepy. You've probably got a stalker." "Oh, please don't use that word," Jane whined. "Whoever it is probably has a horrible crush on you and just wants your attention. You are irresistible." Lorraine leaned over and kissed Jane on the head before going back to her own office. "Why isn't that woman gay?" Jane mused. "You know, I've been told that I do have the power to turn straight women gay. Why doesn't she succumb to my charms?" Ari laughed and joined her on the divan. "Because, honey, Lorraine loves men almost as much as you love women. The only difference between the two of you is that she's much more discreet." "I'm discreet? Janie, your name is plastered on bathroom stalls in all of the lesbian bars. Women have written testimonials about your prowess in the bedroom and put them on the internet. It's not discreet if I can Google you and know about your sex life." She shrugged, admitting her reputation. "Do you think the orchids are from one of my past conquests?" "I don't know. It's possible. It would certainly make sense, sweetie. Most women think that going to bed leads to a relationship or a commitment. You've left a trail of women in the dust, and some of them have been pretty angry. How many times have you changed your phone number?" "I'm always honest with them. I've never promised any woman anything. And to answer your question, only 3 times in the last year." "I don't think that's a big deal. Most of the women I see understand our relationship, or rather the fact that the word is not in my vocabulary." "That's true, but honey, all it takes is one." Jane looked out the window, and Ari knew she was filing through the past few months of lovers. Ari could name at least 6 different women Jane had vetted recently, and she was sure there were many more. Jane loved women, met them frequently, and didn't hesitate to fornicate anywhere. "I just don't think it's a woman," she mused. "It's too awful to think a woman would stalk another woman like that. In my nightmares, it's always a man." "How do you know?" "His feet. I hear his shoes. against the pavement, and they aren't stilettos. It sounds like I'm being chased by an elephant. Jane looked around the room. How do you do this? Do what? Keep your office this neat. Ari scanned her desk and credenza, which were uncluttered and free of random sticky notes or phone messages. Her folders were organized, alphabetically of course, and her to-do list was displayed prominently next to her phone. She could only shrug, knowing Jane would never understand. They sometimes joked that one of Jane's ex-lovers was buried underneath the piles of paper that were stacked around her office. She was fastidious about her manners and appearance, but that vanished at the entrance of her workspace. Jane extended her legs and wiggled her free toes. I'm bored with this topic for right now. We can talk about you for a little while. Let's start with your birthday party at Hideaway, which is still somewhat about me since I'm planning it. I guarantee it will be a night of heavy drinking, general debauchery, and extreme merriment. Ari winced at the description. Please don't forget that there are many straight people coming. Granted, they are liberal straight people, but you do tend to blur the lines of decency. Sometimes I'm offended. She patted Ari's knee and laughed. Don't you worry, honey. Lynn and Brian are helping me plan the party, and they're keeping me on the appropriate side of decency, as you put it. Brian and Lynn were Ari's brother and sister-in-law. Ari gripped Jane's shoulders. Promise me that you'll exercise some control regarding this party. Her eyes narrowed. Define control. Well, that would mean no strippers, no sex toys. Wait, no sex toys, but sex is okay, right? Jane! Hey, I'm just looking for parameters. She chuckled. Honey, you don't need to worry. She clapped her hands once and sat up on the couch. Now, back to me. What should I do about this flower business? Ari rose and grabbed a notepad from her desk. Tell me the history again. This makes number 4 in the past month. The first one was left on my desk at the office. The second one was on top of my car outside Hideaway. The third one appeared on the bench in front of my gym locker. And now this one. It seems like each one gets a little more personal. Damn right, whoever it is knows where I live, where I work, and how I spend my time. I'm totally creeped out. She tapped her pencil on the notepad. You said 4 in the last month. Is that about 1 a week? Jane narrowed her eyes. Well, that's about right, but the last 2 were only 4 days apart. That could be significant. She, or he, may be losing patience. Can you think of any women you've crushed lately? Jane scowled. Don't say that. You make me sound like a monster. I just like a good time. She looked up at Ari, who stared without comment. She wasn't going to argue with Jane about her reputation within Phoenix's lesbian population. And no, I have not had a screaming match with any woman in the past month, nor have I needed to duck because a date was throwing a shoe at me. The fall season has clearly been about meeting enlightened women. She held up her chin with an air of dignity. Ari sighed and sat down on the couch. Well, then maybe it's somebody who's old-fashioned and is trying to court you. Jane smirked and shook her head. I doubt it. Maybe you should hire a private investigator, someone who could check out the orchids, see if there is some way to tell where they're grown. Jane held up her hands. Why do I need a PI? You've got it all figured out. We could do it together. I don't know, Jane. Molly made me promise that I would never again involve myself in anything dangerous, not after last time. I'm just talking about the orchid part, Jane said. The simple legwork, no chasing criminals. That'll give me time to look for a real PI. What do you say? Please, I'm really desperate here. She hated it when Jane whined. She rarely put on a pathetic face, but when she did, it was priceless. Ari sighed. Hand me the phone book and let's look up florists. That concludes this listening session. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, check out some of my other recordings, and visit my website, annroberts.net.